Thank you. Yeah, and I never take these invitations for granted. I always enjoy coming and talking to other fish people, and I think it's an honor whenever you're invited to give a talk, and I certainly feel that way. I drove in from work, and your club treated me to a lovely dinner with Bill, Jim, and Paul. So I thank you very much for your courtesy, and like I said, I'm here to share some experiences with you. And despite Bill saying the young man, me, I am 63 years old, so I'm not exactly, that young. And that's why, when Paul said I've been in the hobby 50 years, this is true. Now, let me just sort of get a show of hands to start. How many of you have never kept a killifish? Wow, that's pretty good. That's about half the audience. All right, well, you're basically my target, okay? Because this is an American Killifish Association sponsored talk, and I've been a member of the American Killifish Association since 1975, and I'm currently a life member, and I think it's a very worthwhile organization. Later on, I'll show you something I brought in for the auction that will hopefully induce one of you to want to keep killifish. Now, because I've been in the hobby a long time and been involved in aquarium clubs for a very long time, I've heard all the stories, about killifish. Oh, no, I don't keep killifish. They die in a year. Okay? No, I don't keep killifish. They're too aggressive. Okay? Nah, I don't keep killifish. They're too hard to keep. And last but not least, I don't keep killifish because I can't find any. Now, the last one actually has some merit. And I understand the frustration level because it is difficult to find a wide variety of killifish in pet shops. And that is why the American Killifish Association was started in 1962. It is the oldest national organization in the United States. It was founded before any of the others for that very reason, because it was hard to get killifish. So a couple of guys wrote to each other and they said, hey, let's start a club. And, killifish eggs can actually be sent through the mails very easily because they take a little while to hatch, So that meant it was cheap to mail the eggs, even from overseas. And, so people started sharing information about killifish through the AKA. And being in an organization like the AKA gives you the ability to talk to people in the killifish hobby. And I'll tell you this, in addition to being a life member of the AKA, I'm also a life member of the American Cichlid Association and many other clubs. Let me tell you this. Maybe I shouldn't tell you this, no. Killifish people are very generous, very generous. There's no money in killifish. If any of you are dreaming of making oodles of money breeding killifish, despair right now. It won't happen, okay? So let me just begin a little bit by telling you, well, how did I get interested in killifish? Because as a kid, 13-year-old kid growing up in Queens, trust me, the local pet shops had no killifish. I'd never seen one. I was your typical kid, zebra danios, neon tetras, woohoo, Then for one year, the friend of mine from grammar school who was also into tropical fish gave me a present. And this present consisted of the famous William T. Innes book called Exotic Aquarium Fishes. So I was very excited because this was the first book on fish I'd ever owned. This was like, wow! So I started reading through the book and looking at pictures, some of the fish I had recognized, but nothing really blew me away until I saw that picture. Now, those of you who know killifish know that's the fabled blue Galaris, okay? That happens to be the emblem fish of the American Killifish Association. It comes from West Africa. This also, in case you're interested in the history of it, this is the first color photo ever taken of an aquarium fish in the United States, okay? Innis, I think, in part, selected this fish because this is a predatory fish, like most fish, you know, but so it kind of like waits until something comes along. So that meant it would sit still for his color exposure, which you can imagine back in the 1930s would have been quite long. And also, it's very striking. Like I said, I mean, how many fish have you ever seen that look like this? Here's one of its distinctive traits. I mean, look at this tail. Okay, orange, blue, yellow, all right? As far as I know, there's only one other freshwater fish known to our hobby that has what I call a tripart tail like that, and that's the emperor Tetra, okay? So I think seeing this picture of a killifish and knowing that they just weren't around, you couldn't just walk into any pet shop and buy one, made it an early childhood fascination for me, okay? And so from that moment on, if I ever went into a store and they had killifish, and assuming I could afford them, I would buy one, a pair. And so, but in the beginning, I didn't know anybody who kept killifish, and the books were rather sparse on information, like what size tank, what you should feed them, what temperature. You know, it was kind of not up to what I know now, certainly. But nevertheless, you know, I persevered. And I think, you know, this is how I think about our hobby. I think of our hobby as a very visual one. And if you don't have pretty fish or pretty aquariums, I really don't know the point, you know? And so that's the way I've thought of it next. That, yeah, see this? This ain't fake. This is a real killifish, not photoshopped. This is an orange Aphyosemion australe, which have been in the hobby a long, long time. And this was a sport that came from the natural brown population, a beautiful chocolate brown with orange spots, okay? So this was not intentionally bred to be that color. It's just a sport that showed up in somebody's tank, and somebody said, hey, that's a damn good-looking fish, all right? And it's one of my favorite fish. I still keep it to this day, because let me ask you this. You know, look at that picture. It's orange, and that other stuff, except for the white tips, it's purple. Purple. How many wild fish do you know are orange and purple? It puts Dunkin' Donuts to shame in terms of the color scheme. And look how pretty that tail is. Okay, next. How about this? You think fancy bettas are pretty? Yeah, they are, but they're man-made. Not this guy. This is a bivitatum, another Aphyosemion, okay? All the Aphyosemions, by the way, come from Africa. Look at that palette of colors. I mean, we have colorful fish here. Hey, I'll be the first one to tell you, cardinal tetras are colorful, okay? But not quite in this way, okay? Red platies are colorful, but look at the spectrum of colors here and the finnage, all nature-made. And this fish and the australe that I showed you, you know, the males are bigger than females in all these killifish. You know, they top out at like 2.5 inches. They're not monster fish. You can keep them in small aquariums. Next. Here's another type, very vibrant colors, okay, another Aphyosemion. Next. Here's another classic of the killifish hobby, Aphyosemion striatum, okay? Look, now this picture doesn't really do it justice. The base color is not really gray. The photograph didn't turn out too good. The base color is like a steel blue, okay? So you have to picture a steel blue fish with these rows of red dots, and then these fins that are blue with red dots, with red stripes, with yellow stripes. I mean, come on. There's no group of tropical fish that has more colorful species as a whole than killifish. None. Next. How about this one? This one is called Fundulopanchax gardneri. Fundulopanchax is closely related to Aphyosemions, okay? They also come from Africa. And there's different populations, but you know, this one in the killifish hobby is fairly common in the killifish hobby, okay? And I think part of that reason is, one, the males get to be about 3 to 4 inches, you know, a really big one. So they're not tiny little fish where you can't see the color. You know, one time I don't know how many of you have ever kept peacock gudgeons, you know. Great fish, colorful as all hell. You need a microscope to see it, you know, it's a slight drawback. Not this fish. Plus, these fish will eat anything. Trust me, I have lots of them at home. In fact, for your auction tonight, I brought in a pair of fish that I raised, these gardneri. They eat everything. So don't ask me, well, what they don't eat, because they ain't no such thing. Maybe they don't eat spaghetti and marinara sauce. But next. Then, on the opposite spectrum of really tiny killifish is this. This is sometimes called the clown killie. It's an epiplatus. It's called Epiplatus annulatus, and it also comes from Africa. These guys, that's a male. The females have no color in the tail, okay? But look at that tail. Like, who designed that? Gianni Versace? Who designed that? I mean, it's amazing. Look at that tail. And the fish isn't bad either. You know, chocolate brown interspersed with beige, you know. It's a very pretty fish. So, and these, you could keep a whole slew of them in a 5-gallon tank. They'll think they're in an ocean, okay? Because these males top out at like 1.5 inches. This is one of the few killifish species where the females are slightly larger, but not, or at least the same size, you know? Next. Now, this fish you see in pet shops. This is the gold form of Aplocylus lineatus, which is it's a Southeast Asian fish. And somebody on some farms in Malaysia or wherever, they took a fish where the male was essentially a spangled fish, a very pretty fish, very spangled blue, red, silver, and somebody figured out how to make it solid gold. Have you ever seen any of these in a pet shop? I'm telling you, the first time I saw one, I was like, wow, they're solid gold colored. I don't mean yellow, I don't mean beige, I don't mean platinum, I mean gold, all right? Very striking. And I think because of that, they've become popular, they've become commercialized more than some other killies. The only thing is, you know, you have to know what you're doing. And this is why joining an organization like the AKA and reading literature is important, because while most killifish are not that aggressive, in fact, people often ask me, well, Joe, can you keep them in a community tank? Absolutely. Most of them, absolutely. Problem is, they're actually pretty shy. If you keep them in a very hectic community tank, they may never come out. All right? Not these guys. These guys are big. The males get to be, you know, top out at 5 inches. They're surface feeders. You could see that from the top of their head. So they're always at the surface. And the males are ruthless sex machines, which means those females better have a lot of hiding places, like plants and stuff, because they are aggressive. Now, you know, most male killifish, that's what they do. They eat and have sex, okay? Yeah, what a lifestyle. Not for me, I'm 63. But some are less aggressive than others. Like the fish I've shown you so far up to this point, other than the blue galaris, they're not that aggressive. And you see, there's a commonality there. You know, the blue galaris is the largest exotic killifish there is, and this one comes in like second or third, all right, of the exotic killifish. So generally, the bigger the killifish, the more aggressive it's going to be with the females. Next. Then, so far I've shown you some African fish, some Southeast Asian fish. This one is a rivulus, and it comes from South America. All rivulus comes from South America, so if you ever see a fish in an auction or in a listing and you're interested and it says rivulus, they're from South America. Rivulus are sort of the South American analog to Aphyosemians. There's a lot of species. They're not aggressive. They're not that large. There's so many of them, okay? Some of them are quite colorful. This one is kind of like a powder blue thing, you know. Not as striking, I would say, as some of the African things, but, you know, just want to show you that there are killifish in other places. Next. Here's another one from South America. This one you can see has a lot of red in it. Next. This one is Cubanictes pengelii, and I have it in at this juncture so that I remember to tell you that killifish are a very widespread family of fishes. They're found on every continent except Australia. The last time I gave this talk, some wise guy said, well, what about Antarctica? There ain't no fish in Antarctica, okay? So you know it ain't there, okay? I don't have to tell you it ain't there. This one is found, this Cubanictes pengelii. I wouldn't say it's the most colorful killifish I've ever seen, but it's very pretty in terms of its subtlety. It's got beautiful finnage, and it's very peaceful. And the other thing that I like about it is it's only found in one island in the entire world, okay? The island of Jamaica, okay? So when I have Jamaican friends over my house, you know what I do, right? Hey, guess what? I have a fish from Jamaica. No, man, you kidding. Yeah, I do. Come down, I'll show it to you, you know? So North America has a lot of killifish. Europe has a bunch. But having said that, by far, the most striking ones in terms of color come from Africa, and the most striking ones in terms of finnage, they come from South America. But between those two groups, you've got a lot to choose from. Next. Oh, and here's one of the American ones. This one you see in pet shops from time to time because they're wild in down south, especially in Florida, okay? Sometimes it's called the flagfish. A retailer might list it as that. These fish love to eat vegetable material. The males are quite striking. You know, they have this blue-green scales with these intermittent rows of red dots. The females are kind of all right? But the males are quite striking, and when they're in pet shops, they're not that expensive. So if you wanted to try a killifish that's not difficult to breed, you could find this in a pet shop. And like I said, they like a lot of vegetable material in their diet, so you would get like spirulina flakes or something like that to feed them. But no question, they're killifish from North America. Next. Okay, now a few words about setups. And by the way, if you have any questions while I'm talking, please don't hesitate. All right, I love questions. They often remind me of things I forgot to mention. Okay, so this is a setup I had, as you can see, for Orange Australe. And what I did was I took a 10-gallon tank and I divided it in half. You know, I put a piece of glass in there and siliconed it in so I could keep 2 pairs. And just to dress it up a little bit, I put some cryptocorenes in clay pots. You know, you don't need any of that stuff. I've been to a lot of killifish breeders' fish rooms, and let me tell you, killifish breeders are about as low-tech as you can get. They barely have water, okay? I remember one of the very first killifish rooms I ever visited by this terrific killifish breeder, and he had these, like, this rack, wooden rack, had a bunch of 5.5s and some 10s on it. There was no overhead lighting in this room. The way you would see his fish is he would walk up to the tank, which looked pitch black, okay, and he would shine one of those shop lights. You know the kind I'm talking about, the incandescent that hang from a hook? He would shine it on the tank. And all of a sudden, from the darkness, would materialize this jewel of a fish. I was like, whoa! Because like so many other fish, when you have the lighting in the front or you hit the fish from the front, that's when their coloring really comes out, okay? But I'm telling you, so he had these 5.5-gallon tanks, bare bottom, some corner filters with gravel in it as a filter medium, and that's it, and a mop, if they were mop spawners, which all these Aphyosemians, the vast majority of killifish are not annuals, contrary to this myth that's out there, and they just lay their eggs in artificial mops or plants or whatever, okay? And they live the same lifespan as an ordinary, you know, tropical fish, 3 years or more, all right? So anyway, but that was all he had in his tank, okay? A box filter with gravel in it, some spawning medium, and that's it, and water, okay? And most killifish breeders, you see how that tank is not filled up to the top? Most killifish breeders, they never fill their tanks to the top. And part of that is, well, I don't know what really, except because every one of my tanks is covered, because when I come down to my fish room, I don't want to feel like I'm in a sauna, all right? And I've been to people who have fish rooms where all the tanks are uncovered, and God forbid they should keep high-temperature fish. It's like I'm just sweating to death, all right? But part of the reason is the fish don't really need a tall water column, okay? The other thing is this. If you keep killifish and you don't keep a covered tank, you will not be keeping killifish for long. Guaranteed. They will jump out of your tank, okay? Even a hole that you think is too small for a killifish to jump out of, they will. I remember this experience, just to highlight this for you, because I can't really emphasize this enough. One time, a friend of mine, who was from Trinidad, went home, and God bless his soul, he went collecting. And he came home, and he had a mess of fish. And he gave a lot of them to me, and among them was the only killifish found on the island of Trinidad, called Rivulus hardeye. And it's basically a nice little fish, nothing to write home about, but it's got like green stripes, whatever. Okay, so he gives me 20 of them, all right? Now, I was not prepared to receive all these tetras and all these other things, never mind 20 killifish. So I looked around my fish room, and, you know, like a lot of us do, I had an empty 10-gallon tank, right? I said, okay, I'll just put them temporarily in here. There's no filtration, no nothing, but I'll put them in here. I filled the tank half up with water, put some dechlorinating thing in. Then I looked around, I put the fish in, then I looked around for a cover, and the only thing I had was this giant piece of glass that was much bigger than the 10-gallon tank. So I said, they'll be fine in there. I put the top on. The next day, around 11 o'clock in the morning, I came down to, mess around in the fish room. I think it was a Saturday. And after a few minutes, I walk over to this 10-gallon tank where I put these 20 rivulus hard-eye, and I bend down. I look in the tank. There's not a single damn fish in there. Now, I don't believe, Houdini was a great magician, but they're all tricks, So I'm looking at this tank and I'm going, this is not possible. There's no hole here. The cover is bigger than the tank. And then, as the mist cleared and I cleared my eyes and started looking, what had happened? Yeah, all 20 of those fish were glued to the cover. All 20 of them. They were all up there. Now, could you imagine if I hadn't had a cover? I would have come down in the morning and done a cucaracha on the fish, okay? So killifish are adapted for moving, many of them, from small puddles to other small puddles, okay? A lot of them can remain out of water, you'd be surprised, for quite extended periods of time, as long as they're kept moist. So you don't need big tanks. A 5.5-gallon tank, I'm telling you, is an ocean to them for most of these fish. But you do have to have a cover. Next. Okay. Then, besides the water, you have to have a breeding medium, okay, for most of these fish. So here's a typical thing. We call it a mop. It's made from synthetic yarn that you tie to some floating device. In this case, the guy used a cork. And we don't use wool or anything like that. We just use synthetic fibers. And that's another myth, that you have to boil these things. Baloney. Okay, you don't have to boil any of them. You can just use them after you make them straight into the tank, all right? And the color, I've seen every color under the sun, okay? I don't think the fish care. I'm not even sure if they make any differences about it. The only thing I would tell you, though, is the darker the color, the easier it is for you to see the eggs, okay? If you use a very light-colored mop, like made out of white yarn, you will have difficulties seeing the eggs, even with lineatus eggs, which are relatively large. And also, I don't recommend, though, using dark black yarn, because killifish are a little bit like chameleons, and they will change their color slightly to adapt to their environment, okay? The other advice I always give people when they start breeding killifish is, when you take that mop out of your tank after, let's say, wait a week or two before you take it out to start looking for eggs. Hang it on the side of a bucket and let it drip for a while. Because the drier the mop, the easier it is to see the eggs. Otherwise, they look like little water droplets, and you might not spot them. Next. Okay, you see what they look like? Now, that's not hard to see, right? I mean, you might need your reading glasses, but, And these eggs are very, very tough. So all you do when you find them is you pick them with your forefinger and your thumb. Just pick them right off. They're slightly adhesive, but after you pick them off, next, you put them in little storage trays, with water, obviously. So when you put your fingers in that water in that tray, it loosens the adhesive and they come off, okay? This happens to be the way I do it. I bought this in a hardware store one year, and what I liked about it was, the trays slide in and out, they hold water, they're covered. Look at this, 9 different kinds of fish in a relatively small area on my fish room table, okay? And obviously, you have to label the fish so that you know what's hatching out in each one of those things. It's especially important because most killifish females from a particular genus, they all look alike, okay? So God forbid you mixed up your Gardneri, you know, up at the top over there, with your Bivitatum fungi over there, you're going to have a hard time telling the females apart. And actually, Bivitatum fungi's females have a little discernible thing in that they have a stripe on their body. But a lot of other female killifish, they're just beige fish with clear fins. Good luck, okay? So you do have to, you know, keep them separated. Don't ever put them in the same grow-out thing together. Next. Okay, yeah, you see how they slide in and out, and they hold enough water so that the incubation of, let's say, 2 weeks easily accomplished. Next. And here's how they develop. You see, on the bottom, when you first pick them, they're clear. And then look how progressively dark they get, okay, until they finally pop. Now, if you give these fish the proper nutrition and, you know, good food, if you can give them live food, that's great, but they don't need live food, but you have to give them good nutrition. And as long as you're watching the females and protecting them, some people, you know, they keep the female in a separate container until they fed her enough, then they throw her in with the male so she's ready to go. But if you do those two simple things, protect your females and feed the fish good food, they will lay eggs. This is what killifish do. That's all they do besides eat, okay? So now, some killifish require maybe a little higher temperature, a little lower temperature, fine. In terms of the pH, they don't care. Those Gardneri, I'm telling you, they're like bulletproof. I think to kill them, I have to get a sledgehammer, okay? I move them around from tank to tank, into here. I don't check pH, I don't check anything, okay? Whatever they get thrown in, they go. Where's the food? And where's the female? Come on. It's time for sex here. That's all they do. Next. Hey, there's a little guy. Now, killifish are very pretty, but unlike cichlids, they're cannibalistic, okay? Now, that doesn't mean they're going to eat every fry in the tank. They don't. And some are less cannibalistic than others. Like, remember I showed you that picture? Next. You see if it's coming up. Okay, well, all right. Well, we'll get to that, about their cannibalism. Here's some plastic containers that hold, I don't know, 1.5 gallons of water. So after the fish, the killies hatch out from those little tool containers over there, that hardware container. Then they get moved into these boxes. And you can see, again, I label them, all right, so that I know what's in that box. Next. In each of these boxes, this is my own invention, a little homemade sponge filter, just to keep the water circulating, add a little whatever, so that, you know, if you forget to do a water change, which I recommend, you know, you change 50% of the water once a week. But if you forget, this allows you to have some slippage, okay? There are, you know, anything that's small or short or whatever is fine. This one, I made this one because I'm a cheap bastard, okay? And I wanted something that I could make on my own that didn't cost $7. Does anybody know what that is, by the way? It ain't made for the aquarium trade, I'll tell you that. Anybody want to take a guess? It's a hair curler. Okay? Yeah, one day, you know, I'm a weird guy. I'm looking at hair curlers, right? And I noticed that these things are cylindrical. They have a hole down the middle, okay? A hole that happens to be the exact same size of this rigid tubing. So taking some sponge material from elsewhere, you plug up the bottom. Then I took this rigid tubing, cut it so it was just poking out, took a hot nail, made alternating holes in here, then glued in with crazy glue, rigid airline tubing, boom. I've had these things in use for 20 years. Next. But you can also do this with some killies. This is my 10-gallon tank that has a killifish from Madagascar in it, okay? And what I do in here is, you see it's got all these this floating hornwort, and then it's got all the dead hornwort, okay? Well, all that provides hiding places and breeding spots for fry. And this particular group of fish, and there are many species of pachypanchax, they're not particularly aggressive. So I found that over the years, I could cut down on my work by just opening the lid, looking at the surface, come out, wherever you are, and they do. They come out floating on the surface, they're swimming on the surface. I then get a little net, and I scoop them out as fast as I can. And then I move them to a grow-out tank. So that's one lazy way to do it. Next. And how about this one? This is, you see all the fish here? This is that clown killie, you know, the one with the fireball tail. Okay, well, this is a 20 long, and it's got a water sprite, some rickia, some crappy Java moss. But this thing has been in operation for 14 years. 14 years of nonstop killifish production. And this fish is in demand. Not money-wise. Forget the money. Not money-wise. It's just in demand among other hobbyists, other killifish hobbyists. So I'm very happy that I'm able to keep them going. And again, I don't pick any eggs. Are you kidding? How the hell am I going to pick an egg in there? And what I do to keep it going, what's very important, though, to keep this kind of a natural colony going, is you do have to hatch out baby brine shrimp, okay? To me, you might not have to, because these fish will eat standard aquarium fare, okay? As long as it's small enough to fit in their mouths. Then they're not that fussy, they're not. But the baby brine shrimp, what they do is, you know, they swim around, they go in there, they're swimming everywhere, so the babies have a chance to pick them off at all different levels and everything like that. And let me tell you, the babies are cute as hell, all right? And this is part of what I enjoy about the aquarium hobby. I enjoy having natural setups where I don't have to do any work. I don't know. Some of you might like doing work. I don't. Next. Here's a close-up. This picture stinks because I took it. But there they are. You see, and you know, here's the other, to me, it looks so natural. It looks like they're swimming in the middle of a jungle, you know, which is where they come from, West African jungles. Next. Okay, this picture brings me to another point. What do you think? You think that's a colorful fish? Raise your hand if you don't think that's a colorful fish. Okay, I agree. It's one of the most colorful fish in the aquarium hobby. And that's wherein lies the second level of killifish keeping. And this is where all the myths come from. But you see, and I'm going to tell you something about these fish, but I'm going to tell you that they're in the minority. There are thousands of species of killifish, and a fish like this, which is known as an annual from Africa, it's called Nothobranchius rackovii. It's been around a long, long time in the hobby, comes from East Africa, as opposed to West Africa, right? East Africa, and they're found in these temporary puddles. And all these nothobranchius, because they're only found in Africa, and there's many of them, many, many species. They're all found in these temporary pools that are formed when the rainy season comes, and the eggs that have been laid by the previous generation in the mud, all of a sudden, all pop, 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 they hatch, okay? Then when they're big enough, which usually takes about 4 weeks, they start breeding. And they lay more eggs in that mud, okay? And then the reason they die is because these temporary puddles dry up, you know? Most fish can't really go that long without water, all right? So, you know, that's why they're known as annuals. And you don't have to go this route to be a great killifish keeper. There are killifish keepers who don't want to go anywhere near this annualism, because I'll tell you a few drawbacks about it. But you may say, well, Joe, then what the hell are you telling us about these fish for? Okay, here's why I'm telling you. Because annual killifish are the only group of hobby fish that will give you an experience that you cannot get from any other fish. None, zippo. Only these guys. And let me tell you something. When you've bred these fish and you've collected the peat moss and everything that they've laid their eggs in, and you put them away, and 3 months later, 6 months later, whatever, depending on the species, you wet them, meaning you put them in a container, a small container, and you pour water over that peat moss, and you come back 24 hours later, and you see hundreds of baby fish swimming around. Let me tell you, it's quite a thrill. It's not something you can get from any other fish, this like instant fish thing. It is amazing. All right, next. Here's another nothobranchius. I mean, the Rackovii is considered probably the top of the heap in terms of coloration, but this one over here, a Kirkeye, hey, blue with red. I mean, pretty damn good-looking fish, all right? There's a lot of nothos with that color scheme. Next. Here's another annual. This one is Sino Levius wide-eye. All the I can't keep up with these generas, by the way. They're constantly, the scientists in Brazil and everything keep changing their genus, okay? So forget it. I don't even pretend I'm keeping up with it, but trust me, this is a wide-eye. And you see what I mean about the finnage? So the color of this fish from South America, you know, it's brown, basically, with some yellow highlights, whatever. But look at the symmetry of that finnage. Isn't that a pretty fish? Next. Here's another one, Simpsonictes boytoni, another annual from South America. Next. Yeah, what do you say to that? You ever see a freshwater fish that looks like that? Angelfish don't look like that. I like angelfish as much as the next person, but they don't look like that, okay? I mean, this is what I meant about the finnage of South American annuals. And I'm only showing you a few of them, okay? There's many, many species, and many of them are just spectacular looking, like that guy there. Next. Okay, so here's what annuals do, right? They lay their eggs in a substrate. Currently, my formula is I mix 50% peat moss from Jiffy peat pellets. You ever see those? They come in a little mesh net. Take the mesh off, throw it in water, it soaks and it expands. I mix those with cocoa fiber, which nowadays you can buy in many pet shops. I mean, ZooMed, I know, markets it in a brick. They market it loose for reptiles. But you soak that coconut fiber, and it's perfectly fine in an aquarium. And the fish kind of dive in there. Some fish dive more, some fish dive less, but nevertheless, they go in there. Next. Now this guy, I forget who set it up this way. Notice what he did was he had a custom-made tank. This was probably like the equivalent of a I don't know, 5.5 or something. And he put a glass divider like halfway up. And then he put all his stuff on the other side so that it wouldn't contaminate the side in which he put the food. You know, you don't want the food dropping into that mixture, okay? Because then it pollutes it, whatever. So this is pretty elaborate, you know, to do this. Here's what I do next. Yeah, you see, I use these little drum bowls, the smallest ones they make, which is, I'm not good at this. Is a pint smaller than a quart? Yes. Yeah, pint, okay. I use these pint drum bowls. What I like about them, besides the fact that they're not that expensive, I use glass only, not plastic, because the plastic tends to float. This stuff isn't heavy, you know. What I like about them is, you see, it's got this curved sides. So when the fish go in there, especially the South American ones, which dive deeper, they spray this stuff all over the place, okay? And if you didn't, but here, the tendency for the material is to hit the sides and fall back, okay? Otherwise, if you use a straight-sided container, unless it's very tall, you're going to find a lot of the medium outside in the tank, okay? You can keep multiple pairs together, okay? The males of most fish, they will spar with each other, but they're not lethal, you know? And the male, it's amazing to watch them. The male actually, he knows, hey, wait, I don't know how they do this. Oh, wait, there's the peat moss. It ain't here, but I know it's here. Don't ask me how they know this. I don't know. I don't think they see this stuff in nature. In nature, they spawn in sand and mud. But they go in there, and they flare, they do all their strutting to try to attract the females, and guess what? Yeah, the females go in there. It's quite a thing to behold. So, next. Then what you do is, you see, every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or depending on how much energy you have, you take that bowl and you pour the contents into a fine mesh net, right? And then you squeeze the hell out of it. These eggs are tough. They're tough eggs. You ain't going to break them. You ain't going to make an omelet, trust me. Squeeze that peat moss so it's not really wet, just kind of moist, right? Then you put them in a container, like, you know, I use these things left over from the weekly Chinese food, you know, delivery. And I wash them, no soap. Then when I put the stuff in there, you know, it's compacted because I've been squeezing it in the net. So then I cover it and I shake it, okay? This opens up the peat moss and everything. Then I take the lid off again so oxygen goes back in there. And now it reaches this peat moss that's been tossed around. Then after I do that, I put them in my hatching container. But you don't need a hatching container. I only have this hatching container because I got it in a trade with the guy who owns ZooMed. He didn't want to do the trade, but I had something he desperately wanted. So I'm not mercenary, but I'm not an idiot either, you know. I said, give me one of these things too. And this is a product that ZooMed makes called, they call it their Reptibator. It's for hatching reptile eggs, which I have no interest in, okay? But what this device does is it keeps the temperature pretty constant. And that's one of the things you want to do. Regardless of whether you keep it in a thing like this or not, you can keep them on a shelf. The important thing is to keep the temperature constant, okay? Anywhere from 75 to 80. The higher the temperature, the faster the eggs develop, you know. Now, you don't always have success. I mean, this, you know, but that's just like any other fish. Haven't you ever kept fish you couldn't get to breed to save your life? Well, I got news for you. You know, sometimes, look at this. I mean, here, 7, 12, 15, I collected it. I'll wait 5 months, throw the damn thing in a thing of water, and nothing happens. Now, you know, these fish have their own cycle. So sometimes I don't throw it away right away. I re-dry it, repack it, wait another month, all right? But, so having said that, yeah, it's more work than other fish, annual killifish, not regular killifish. Regular killifish, take it to the bank, are as easy as any other tropical fish. I challenge anyone to show me differently, okay? Annuals, I grant you, are more challenging, but boy, what a challenge. The other thing that makes them challenging, just so you know, in case you're ever tempted to try some, which wouldn't be a bad thing, they will only eat live food. So forget flakes, even frozen food, they go, okay? And the babies are the same way. So if you do get a bloom of instant annual killifish, you better have like microworms or live baby brine shrimp, because otherwise those fish are dying. Next. Yeah, there's my purloined reptibator. Next. Another trick that I use when it's time to hatch the peat moss, I try to put it in a relatively tall glass container, and I put the peat moss in there, and then I put that container inside a larger plastic tank, and then I fill up the entire tank with water. Why? Because I don't want this peat moss all over the bottom of my hatching tank, because if that happens, you have a hard time seeing the babies, because they're hiding in all this peat moss. As opposed to if you keep the rest of the tank bare like this, they're going to stand out like a sore thumb, all right? So I don't recommend that you take the peat moss and just throw it in the bottom of a hatching tank and then pour the water in. Next. There you go. See, I'm not lying. Next. Here's a couple of, Aphyosemion striatum kind of jousting with each other. And you will see this if you have more than, one male. But like I said, don't worry about it. They're not gonna kill each other. Next. Okay, it's your typical sunset. Now, let me explain what this is. In order to try to induce somebody to either keep killifish for the first time or keep killifish again, I have here a complete killifish starters kit. Let me tell you what's in here. First, you have the tank, right? Now, the tank is used, but it was used by a killifish breeder, so you know it worked, okay? And in fact, the bottom is hand-painted black, okay? So that the killifish, killifish don't like to see their reflection, too much. They think it's a rival. All right, so that's the tank. Then, custom-made cover, okay, with a slight opening so that if you want to put a box filter in there or a sponge filter, there's an opening that will just accommodate the airline tubing, okay? But not that you need a filter, okay? So it comes with the cover. Then you get this package. Here is the official AKA beginner's guide. So even if you go, I don't know anything about killifish, and Joe, you weren't much help, this killifish guide will be of help. Then you have my handmade 100-strand mop, okay, that I made with my own two little itty-bitty hands. And then in this envelope is a 1-year membership to the AKA. That alone, if you were to join the AKA, that would cost you around $29 or $30, I forgot. I'm a life member, so I don't keep up with that, So if you win this item in the auction, you have to fill this out and return it to me so I can call our membership chairperson and enroll you as an official AKA member. And in here, this is not my lunch, okay? There's no peanut butter jelly sandwich in here. This is a pair of my Fundulopanchax gardneri in breather bags, okay? So they could live in here for about 7 years, more or less, okay? And the reason they're in these paper bags, because if you know anything about breather bags, they can't really touch anything that isn't porous, because then the oxygen doesn't go through. But paper is not porous, so it doesn't matter, you know. So this is your complete Killifish kit. You go home, you fill it with water, put some dechlorination stuff in the water, and you're off to the races. And like I said, these Gardneri are impossible to kill, and they eat everything. And believe me, it's a very pretty fish. And unless there are any questions, I just want to thank you very much for your attention and everything.